What's up, guys? It's been a while since I've talked to you. It's been a while since I hung out with you. I've been thinking lately that been wanting to do this project. I'm a Nebraska fan, and honestly, this spring game, with all the new additions that we have, just kind of got me thinking about some of the greatest offenses we've ever had and ever seen. So I just thought, what the hell? Analyzing their numbers and their schedules and all that other stuff, and just see what the hell's going on. If you don't mind, maybe one of your teams is on the list. Come check it out. Alright, guys, we are going to, of course, go with, and this one shouldn't surprise anybody, everybody's going to hear this and be like, oh, of course, and that would be USC 2005. We got Reggie Bush, we got Lindell White, Matt Leinart, Dwayne Jarrett. Man, you want to talk about, so you always hear about the 2001 Miami team. You always hear about them and being arguably the most talented team of all time. This team was pretty fucking close. Obviously the defense wasn't that great, but I mean, just on offense, this offense was right up there with being one of the most talented offenses of all time. Reggie Bush, Heisman Trophy winner. Year before, Matt Leinart, Heisman Trophy winner. You had Lindell White, who arguably was the starter right along with Reggie Bush. A little thunder and lightning action, as they say. Lindell White and Reggie Bush, both guys went on to have really good pro careers. Reggie Bush, I'm pretty sure he was an All-Pro at least once. Lindell White was a solid player. I don't think he was ever an All-Pro, but he was a solid player for the Tennessee Titans for several years. You had Steve Smith, who was a great number 2 receiver, sure-handed receiver, who actually was a 1,000-yard receiver in the pros with the Giants, I think. And he was one of those cats that was actually better in the pros than he was in college. Dwayne Jarrett was the other way around. He was a 2-time All-American, arguably one of the best receivers in college football. Super long, tall, make acrobatic catches. He was a beast. Matchup problems all over the place. You had Dominique Byrd, who was a matchup problem at tight end. But what a lot of people don't mention with these guys is two things. Really, really good offensive line. You had Ryan Khalil, All-American at center, who was an All-Pro with the Titans. At guard, Deuce Latui. You had Sam Baker at offensive tackle. Both those guys were All-Americans. That offensive line was the best offensive line in the country that year. Now, the one thing about this offense was there was nothing sexy about their offense. There was nothing flashy about it. You know, the players were flashy. It was a pro-style offense, very vanilla, very straightforward. They didn't throw a lot of wrinkles at you, a lot of one-on-one situations, man-to-man blocking when it came to the running game. They were just that flippin' talented, man. The only wrinkle that I think they really threw at you, whatever you want to call it, was with their fullback. Their fullback was arguably probably had the best hands on the team, you know, whether it be in the flats, whether it be going across the middle, whether it be doing fly patterns. Quite often, if teams were hyper-focused on one of the many stars that they had, they always used him to loosen up on everybody else. You know, just put these players in space and let them do the rest. You know what I mean? Let's see, they played 13 games. They scored 638 points, which gave them an average of 49 points a game. Strength of schedule, they played two teams in the top 10. Notre Dame was number 9 when they played them, and that was a really good game. USC won 34-31. Notre Dame ended up losing in their bowl game to Ohio State. And then, of course, the other top 10 team that USC played was obviously Texas. In recent memory, one of the greatest championship games I've ever seen, period. But yeah, that's what's up. USC Trojans, baby, 2005. Okay, I'm going to surprise some people with this one, I think. Maybe a little biased. Maybe not. I don't know. They were one of my favorite teams to watch, period, growing up. So there you go. There's the bias, right? They were a rival of my team, and that would be the Florida Gators of 1996. They played 13 games. They scored 611 points and averaged 47 points a game. They were ahead of their time. You know, that fun and gun offense was, I believe, ahead of their time, and this was the best product that they ever produced. But also the style of players, the flash of the players, the ease the ease of how they were able to complete passes and the precision on how they were able to just trickle passing on every single down and just fly patterns, just quarterback Danny Werfel to all his receivers at any given moment. It was so easy. And I remember as a kid just thinking, how do they make that look so easy? Like, you watch any other team, I don't care who it was, even teams that pass the ball consistently, it was never as fluid and sweet and just explosive and fast as these teams were. Everybody, when you were playing this team, you were scared as hell of this offense because you had no clue how to stop it. They were one of the first to really start basically throwing on every single down. You know, you did have the run and shoot offenses of Houston back in those days. Was a little bit more trickery. It was a little bit more choppy. It was shorter, almost West Coast style offense a little bit. The fun and gun with Florida, they had that, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. And what I feel like was a lot of the differences was this offense was a wide receiver dominant offense. Ain't no tight ends catching passes. They dumped to the running backs once in a while, but it was all about the wide receivers. And I'm talking crossing routes, deep crossing routes, short crossing routes. They made a point to attack the safeties. They made a point to find that happy spot between where the safety would break and the corner would give up, and they would adjust their routes on the fly. And then they would just out of nowhere break on a fly pattern headed towards a particular direction of the end zone. Great with the fade routes. And again, they were so precise and nickel and dime with it. It was insane. Catch passes yeah. This honestly, just like as I was talking about USC being much more of a player dominant offense. The offense wasn't that flashy. There was nothing sexy about it. It was about the offense. They could make quarterbacks look good. They could make wide receivers look good because quite often the players that this offense produced and the offense the year before produced they didn't do much in the pros, you know what I mean? So it made you kind of understand that it was much more of it was much more of an offensive Steve Spurrier type of system that made these players great. And you had Rydell Anthony, you had Jacquez Green, you had Ike Hilliard. Let's see, Danny Werfel. Danny Werfel was a Heisman Trophy winner that year. Of those players, Jacquez Green, well, I take that back. Jacquez Green and Ike Hilliard were both very good pro players. Rydell Anthony, he was a high draft pick because he was considered one of the best wide receivers in college football, but he was a little bit of a bust. He didn't do much in the pros. Now, what made this offense better, as opposed to the year before, which was equally as productive in terms of putting up numbers, was not only a lot of these guys were a year older, but also their running back, Fred Taylor. Fred Taylor is one of the best running backs I've ever seen. Period. Wiggle and shake of a Barry Sanders, but he was huge. Dude was like 230 pounds. He was fast. I want to say he could run a 4.3. He ran with power. He ran with high knees. He was the total package. And it wasn't a fluke because he was arguably one of the best running backs in the NFL when he was playing for the Jaguars. Fred Taylor he's one of my all-time favorite running backs, period. One of the most talented backs I've ever seen. And while his best year for the Gators was the following year, in 96, he was kind of that running back that, like, every time he got the ball, he made something happen, you know what I mean? Which is one of those, it's like, if they would have emphasized him a little more, but I get why they didn't, because they just had talent all across the field. Schedule was okay. It wasn't great. Let's see, they played Tennessee. Tennessee was number 2 at the time when they played them, and they did beat Tennessee 35-29. They played Florida State, which Florida State was number 2 in the country. Florida was number 1 at that time, I believe, and they lost. They lost to Florida State. Their issue was always offensive line. Their offensive line was always a little dodgy, and that was mainly because they always had lineup issues. On this team, this 96 team, they always had lineup issues. Their offensive line, I swear, was giving up sacks on a regular basis, but it didn't matter. They were so explosive. You know, they would turn a 70-yard play like it was nothing. You would get a sack and stop the run or whatever, and then all of a sudden they would just explode and get 2 or 3 passes and boom, it's a touchdown. You know what I mean? When the offensive line held, that offense could not be stopped. Anyway, Florida State exploited that. When they played in that first game when they played Florida State, and they lost 21-24. That's when this offense got stymied, but that was just because they could not protect Danny Werfel to save their life. You know what I mean? But part of the reason that's because I did say that if an offense proved within their schedule, if an offense proved that they got stopped or slowed down within their season or challenged, I probably wouldn't put them on this list. I made an exception for 2 reasons. One, because this offense was way ahead of its time when it first came out, and also because they avenged that loss. And not only did they avenge that loss where their offense was held down, they avenged it with a vengeance. Okay, so they lost 21-24 against that Florida State team. They replayed them, played them again in the national title game, the Sugar Bowl, and put up 52 points. All right, I'll give them a pass. You know what I mean? Okay, coming up next, Oklahoma Sooners 2008. They played 14 games. They scored 716 points in a season. They averaged 51 points a game. Now this, you want to talk about a statistical juggernaut, right? They could put up numbers like crazy. They weren't a particularly insanely talented team. Yeah. Of course they were talented, you know what I mean, but like in terms of big names, in terms of who all went on to just have crazy pro careers, and how many of them went on to have crazy pro careers, not really, you know what I mean. A lot of it was system, a lot of it was quarterback Sam Bradford. It was almost like that was Sam Bradford's offense, you know what I mean. They had they knew how to set up matchups, they had a lot of speed. They didn't have necessarily any dominant running backs, they didn't have any running backs. Alright, and I do have to admit, I effed up. I'm doing a reshoot, putting down a little bit of extra information. I completely misspoke when I said they weren't much of a running game. They didn't have dominant running backs. Come to find out, that was the majority of their offense. They were a running-based spread offense. 2,000-yard running backs, 2,000-yard rushers. You had DeMarco Murray, who was a hell of a running back for the Dallas Cowboys, and actually had, I can't remember how many years he played, but he was really good for the Dallas Cowboys. And then you had their leading rusher, Chris Brown, who was 1,200 yards, 2,000-yard running backs, with a very physical offensive line when it came to run blocking, 1,000-yard receiver, all those things. Like, while simultaneously a quarterback that put up 50 freaking touchdown passes. You ain't gonna see very often 2,000-yard runners and a quarterback that throws for 4,000 yards and throws for 50 touchdowns. That's pretty damn impressive. You got to give them props. They were a little bit more than just Mr. Sam Bradford. He did have 2 good receivers and huge tight end, as I said, but fast running backs. That was kind of a byproduct of that time with a lot of spread offenses. Everybody was running that spread offense during that time period. Looking at their schedule, you're splitting hairs when you look at, some of the other teams I've mentioned in terms of having a soft schedule. They had a pretty soft schedule, all right? So a lot of not just having a soft schedule, but the top 10 teams that you played, how'd they do in their bowl game, but then also, how did you do in your bowl game? Did you lay an egg? Whatever. But anyway, who they played? They played number 5 Texas, and number 2 Texas Tech, right? Were the only top 10 teams they played, and they thumped Texas Tech. They thumped Texas Tech in the game, but Texas Tech lost really bad in their bowl game, right? Oklahoma did lose in their regular season. Oklahoma did lose to Texas. Texas went on to win their bowl game, right? And honestly, when I was looking at both their schedules, Texas that year in 2008 and Oklahoma in 2008, you can make an argument that Oklahoma ended up playing in the Big 12 title game, but you can make an argument Texas belonged in that Big 12 title game. I believe Texas only lost to, if my memory serves right, Texas only lost to Texas Tech. Oklahoma beat Texas Tech, but lost to Texas. But Oklahoma got the nod to play in the Big 12 title game, right? That's a coin toss right there, right? Other than the eye test, whatever, but I didn't do that much research. But Oklahoma stood the test when they got into the Big 12 title game, and they thumped Missouri, I think it was, which catapulted them into the BCS game against the Florida Gators, a really good Tim Tebow team, where they laid an egg. And they lost to the Florida Gators 24-14, being arguably close to being the highest scoring offense of all time, to come out and get just butt thumped by that Florida Gator defense, which was a very good Florida Gator defense. They definitely exposed that offense, I think, of the kind of the weaknesses of the spread offense. Great open field tackling will shut down a spread offense every time, unless you just have really special players. And that's Oklahoma team. They had Sam Bradford. You know what I mean? Okay, I was talking about Oklahoma, 2008 Oklahoma, knowing how to put up stats. Well, this offense right here was the king of stats. King of stats, and some would say the greatest offense of all time, and that would be Florida State 2013. And this would be number one as far as I know. This is the highest scoring offense of all time. In terms of numbers, highest scoring offense, scored the most points in a 13-game season. They scored 723 points. They averaged 55 points a game. They had Jameis Winston, who was a Heisman winner. They had a really good running back, Devontae Freeman, who went on to be pretty damn good for the Atlanta Falcons, as far as I know, if my research holds up. Devontae Freeman had 1,016 yards. They had two wide receivers. They ended up getting 1,000 yards. And then they had a third wide receiver that was very close to getting 1,000 yards. Their offense was really balanced, man. And their offensive line was really good. I think it was actually arguably their strength. The strength of their team was their offensive line and their pass blocking. Good old Jameis Winston, Heisman Trophy winner. He put up 40 touchdown passes. Threw for 4,057 yards, and the boy had 10 interceptions. How about that schedule? The schedule that Florida State played. Now this is the main reason why you ain't gonna see me saying this is one of the greatest teams of all time. I will make the argument that they're one of the best offenses of all time, but not the greatest teams. They did play number 3 Clemson, and they did thump number 3 Clemson 51-14. Right? They also played Miami, who was ranked number 7 at the time. They thumped them 41-14. And of course they played Auburn, who was ranked number 2 at the time, obviously, because BCS number 1 versus number 2, who they just barely beat 34-31 in the title game. Now, Clemson did win their bowl game against Ohio State, close game. Miami lost their bowl game to Louisville. They got thumped. One thing about this offense that that makes me hesitant to crown them right out the bat, just because not only did they own all the stats, but they were kind of inconsistent. They were their own worst enemy. A lot of penalties. Winston was erratic sometimes. A lot of overthrown passes, but they just kind of seemed like they were big player. Not at all. They, like a lot of these other teams, with the exception of Oklahoma spread, they, like a lot of like the USC team, they were a pro style team. So some really good players in a particular position that made the plays. A lot of one-on-one, ISO blocking, stuff like that. So yeah, very pro-style offense. Who doesn't love a pro-style offense? Whatever, But it's one of those arguments where it's like, what do you want to see? Do you want to see like super polished offenses? Because I've seen offenses where just strictly based on scheme and script, was enough to make it a juggernaut of an offense. You could take 3-star, 4-star players and make them into All-Americans strictly just based on the system that you had. Or you could bring in pro-style offenses and just make sure that you recruit like crazy and can have. But to me, I guess that stuff's inconsistent. You know what I mean? You're going to have amazing teams, amazing offenses on pro-style offenses, but then you're going to have offenses that are just really average. Is when it's system based, you're going to have pretty top-notch offenses almost every single year. Well, whatever, that's just my opinion. Okay, now we get into this juicy fun, right? Call it recency bias, but the most recent team with a juggernaut of an offense, which is arguably one of the greatest teams we've ever seen, and that would be the LSU Tigers, 2019. They played 15 games. They scored 726 points, averaged 48 points a game. 15. They played 15 games, man. 15 games. Joe Burrow statistically put up the greatest season of all time from a college quarterback. You know, Sam Bradford put up 50 touchdown passes in 14 games. In 14 games, he put up 50 touchdown passes, only 7 interceptions. That's pretty damn good. Burrow, in one extra game, 15 games, he put up 5,671 yards, 60 touchdown passes, and only 6 interceptions. Will that ever be duplicated? Never say never. They did whatever they wanted. They really did. You know, and the difference between, in my opinion, my personal opinion, the difference between this offense and that Florida State juggernaut offense that put up crazy numbers, this LSU team wasn't as erratic, or they didn't feel inconsistent. I talk about that Florida Gator team that was ahead of its time, to where it just felt so automatic whenever they would throw a pass downfield, almost as seamless as a handoff. This LSU team took it to a whole nother dimension, completing deep flat patterns that aren't supposed to be easy to complete, crossing patterns with defenders around the receiver, but the receiver would find a way to make the catch. Blew my mind whenever I'd watch this team. One thing I love about Burrow, talking about the stats that he put up, but one of the things that made him special was he not even deceptively fast. The dude could wiggle. His footwork in the pocket was stupid. Like, his ability to feel the pocket and the pocket shift around him, and he very much like a tango, like he was tangoing, you know, in terms of being a slick dancer. He could move in that pocket and had a tight enough throw that he could always get that ball out if that pocket was kind of moving and collapsing around him, right? I feel bad because I didn't write as many stats down here that some of these other offensive players produced on this offense. You know, fuck it, I'll just look it up, right? I wasn't trying to make this video all about stats, but as I'm rambling on and talking about some of the numbers that these teams put up, I guess I kind of have to, right? You had their running back. Okay, talking about running back. Their running back was a stud. Clyde Edwards, 1,414 yards. You had Mr. Fellow Bengals companion of Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, who's one of the best receivers I've ever seen. 84 catches for 1,780 yards. She had Justin Jefferson, who was actually had 111 catches for 1,540 yards. You had Terrence Marshall, who 46 receptions, 600 yards. The chemistry between Burrow and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson was ridiculous, stupid. Never seen anything like it. The running game was solid. They utilized him a lot in the screen game, but I swear a lot of what they were doing. You know, their crossing routes are crazy. Their timing and their chemistry whenever Burrow would move was ridiculous. And I swear the receivers could read his mind whenever he would jump out of the pocket. But I swear that's where a lot of their big plays came from. Was Burrow just, he'd feel the pocket moving, and so he would move. He'd get out of the pocket, and it was just him improving. He had that kind of Brett Favre swagger in the sense of, like, you know, he would get back there and just start gunslinging. I swear I go back and watch a lot of the film. Their biggest plays came when he was thrown out of the pocket. Much like that Florida Gator team, very wide receiver friendly. 13 players drafted in the NFL that year. So, I mean, we're talking about some of the most talented teams. You know, I'm sure that offense had a hell of a scheme to it. But man, when you got this kind of talent, who gives a damn? You could be playing in the backyard. Who cares? Who cares? You don't even need a scheme. Everybody run to the monkey bars and turn left. You know what I mean? Now, here's the one thing that's different. This LSU team versus all these other teams that I've talked about so far is strength of schedule. You know, the Oklahoma Sooners, Florida State, Florida, they played not soft schedules, but they weren't challenged a lot, right? Some of the examples that I've shown you, when they were challenged, their offense would lay an egg, right? This team definitely was proven. Not only did they play 15 games, but they played a very tough schedule. Let's count them down. Texas, Florida, Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, Clemson. So 7 top 10 teams. So Florida was number 6 when they played them. Beat them 42-28. LSU played Alabama. Alabama was ranked number 8 when they played them. Beat them 46-41. That was a fun game to watch. Alabama won their bowl game 35-16 over Michigan. Played Georgia, who was ranked number 4 at that time, 37-10. And they won their bowl game 26-14 over Baylor. Played Oklahoma 63-28. And then they played Clemson in the national title game 42-35. Auburn They did play Auburn, but Auburn, while not ranked in the top 10 when they played LSU the toughest. But ironically, that Auburn team played LSU the toughest, but that Auburn team ended up losing to Minnesota in their bowl game, 31-24. Stupid schedule. Stupid hard schedule. In my opinion, this offense is one of the greatest offenses I've ever seen. Now, here's one thing that I will touch on is the strength of schedule, but also how good was your, did the top 10 teams that you played, did they win their bowl game, but was your conference the toughest conference in the country that year? And that question matters too. LSU, that year, 2019, when LSU just thumped everybody, yeah, it was no doubt. The SEC was easily the best conference in the country that year. There's no doubt. With that being said, the last team that I'm going to talk about, and that would be the Nebraska Cornhuskers of 1995. They played only 12 games. They scored 639 points a game, averaging 53 points per game. Now this offense is unique. But all the other teams that I've been talking about either were just ridiculously talented scheme passing offenses. This one was a running team, arguably statistically the greatest running team of all time. They averaged 400 yards a game on the ground. They blew through four top 10 teams. 3 of the teams that they played in the regular season all validated themselves in their bowl game. Now, I think everybody is kind of like just automatically, I don't want to say brainwashed, but brainwashed. Offense has to be multi-dimensional. Well, 75% of the time, yes, you do need to be multi-dimensional, especially nowadays. It's very rare that you're going to come across a team that is just so overwhelmingly dominant at one thing, whether it be running game or passing game, to where it doesn't matter, which makes it even more impressive when it just doesn't matter. This Nebraska team, it just didn't matter. They were that dominant up front. They were that dominant of running backs. They were that aggressive. They were that mean. They were so mean. They were so aggressive and so brutal and so feisty, as they weren't flooded with talent. It was scheme, attitude, belief, and being talented in the right position. One of the best running backs that I've ever seen, Lawrence Phillips for Nebraska, is one of the most talented running backs I've ever seen. And honestly, Lawrence Phillips and Fred Taylor look alike in terms of their style. They were about the same size. Both of them had insane balance. Both of them had wiggle with amazing footwork. I think Lawrence Phillips had a little bit better vision and cutback ability. Not only the footwork, but he also had the patience. His patience and ability to use his blockers. On top of that, running back Amon Green, who was a 1,000-yard rusher as a freshman, who ended up becoming, I believe, the all-time leading rusher for the Green Bay Packers. They weren't one-dimensional. Blocking scheme was very complex. Their setups were very complex. Their trap game was very complex. The way they used their fullback was different. Their pulling guards and pulling tackles and combo blocking and submarining off tackle. They're submarining away from the play. It was a rhythm with offensive guards and centers peeling off of their initial block off the defensive line and moving ahead. You would almost see it look like a wave of offensive linemen not even block their defensive linemen and would go and they would be all lead blockers. And that was in combination with tight ends blocking down and in combination with multiple wide receivers out there crashing down like further out offensive linemen. And their wide receivers were equally as good of blockers as their friggin' offensive linemen, right? Fucking complex. Introduce that with Tommy Frazier, the greatest option quarterback of all time. Wide option. They had different variations of the option. They would go way wide with the option. They would run a short option. They would run whatever. It wasn't predictable. Like, defenses didn't know, and they would exhaust people mid-second quarter or mid-third quarter. One thing I make a point to show you, there's no one-dimensional. East to west of setups, the way they would use their play action, and they were so efficient with it. But it wasn't so much that they were looking for the big play off their play action. They just wanted to keep the ball moving, keep the sticks moving. Over a 4-quarter game, man, you would get exhausted, and you would get exhausted reading the keys. Forget the fact that they were beating the living shit out of you because they played with such ferocity. We talk about strength of schedule. I was talking about earlier, LSU probably played the toughest schedule. It was the best conference in the college football that year. Ironically, and this will shock some people, but in 1995, the Big 8 conference was the best conference. And it shows in terms of bowl games. They played 4 top 10 teams. When they played Kansas, when Nebraska played Kansas, Kansas was ranked number 9. And they played UCLA and thumped them 51-30. Kansas State, when Nebraska played Kansas State was ranked number 7, and Kansas State had the best run defense in the country that year. Kansas State, in their bowl game, played Colorado State and thumped Colorado State 54-21. Colorado was probably the most talented team. They were ranked number 5 when Nebraska played them, and Colorado in the Rose Bowl played Oregon and thumped Oregon 38-6. And then of course Nebraska played Florida, the number 2 team in the country, Florida Gators, and thumped them 62-24. But that's a big sticking point, guys. That's a big sticking point. Is your competition that is the top 10 teams that you're playing, how do they do at the end of the year when they're taking on other teams? And you know, like I said, this Nebraska team and that LSU team, how easily they made it look, you know. All right, let's go to that honorable mention list, guys. All right, we have Miami of 2001. That Miami team, as talented as they were, they laid a couple eggs offensively. But whatever, that Miami team is, in my book, the most talented team of all time, top to bottom. But that's also including defenses. But that's neither here nor there. Just that offense is on my honorable mention list. They averaged 48 points a game, which is not too bad. How can we not mention the 2005? And honestly, I almost put them on this list of my top teams that I was going to really cover in depth in terms of the numbers and stuff like that. Texas, 2005. That offense arguably was better than some of the teams that I highlighted in here. Whatever. You know what? Maybe I'll do another video of how this Texas offense was better than at least 2 of the offenses that I put. You know, 2 offenses in the same year. That was just no fun. So averaged 50 points a game. They were no joke. But I think part of the reason most of that offense was just freaking Vince Young and a killer offensive line. That offensive line was amazing. I mean, yeah, Jamal Charles, but everybody else was just kind of role players, you know. Really good tight end, but everybody else was just role players. So I think that's probably why I skipped over them. You know. Nebraska, 1983. That 1983 team, you could make the argument, should have been on the list as opposed to the 95 Nebraska offense. But, you know, that 83, the what do they call them, the offensive explosion. Yeah, Mike Rozier, Turner Gill, Tom Rathman, Irving Fryer. They averaged 50 points a game, and I think they played 14 games that year. And then, of course, 2010, Oregon. They put a different spin on the productivity of that spread offense. They averaged 47 points a game, and yeah, I definitely wanted to give a shout out to those Chip Kelly teams. Out of the teams that I chose, man, it's hard for me. You got the stats, you got the talent, and you got the eye test, you got schemes, and then you just have uniqueness. For me, the top 2 offenses I've ever seen was that LSU 2019 and the 95 Nebraska team. Both of them were proven in terms of strength of schedule because both schedules were very hard. Both played in conferences that were the best conferences that year. Both of them made it so seamless in their specific disciplines. What LSU was doing, I've never seen anything like it. And of course, nobody's ever put numbers up like that before. Nebraska, I've never seen a running game change the perception of scoring explosions with the running game. You know, I've never seen a running game average 400 yards a game, and none of the other Nebraska offenses ever came close to that. Not the 83 team, not the 97 team. Now, it may sound biased because I am a Nebraska fan, but the only reason that I'm going to give Nebraska the nod between them and the LSU team is average points. LSU played 15 games, Nebraska only played 12. Nebraska averaged 53 points a game. LSU averaged 48. LSU, that offense was ridiculously talented with NFL talent. the Nebraska offense wasn't. I feel like we will never see anything like the Nebraska offense ever again that can just mow through people like that on such a stiff schedule with such unique, I guess, sacrifice from all the other players to just make the machine work. I mean, we'll probably never see a quarterback put up the kind of numbers that Joe Burrow put up, but we'll definitely see those offenses forever. If I was a defensive coordinator, I'd be scared to death of playing an offense that could literally take your manhood. You know, it's one thing if they can out-athletic you, but if they can literally beat you up so bad, and the thing is that you can't scheme for it. You can't scheme for it. You just have to try to be meaner. And to be able to out-physical a team that arguably is one of the most physical teams of all time, yeah, I would definitely be way more afraid as a defensive coordinator trying to figure out how to stop that offense. It was a unicorn with what that Nebraska offense could do. And so for that reason, I'm picking them. They get the nod. But, I mean, honestly, just whatever. It's a toss-up. At the end of the day, it's all about your preference. Enough said. That's me. Thanks, guys. Love you. How do y'all say it? Give me a like. Hit the subscribe button if you like the content. Like I said, I stay with Nebraska. Every once in a while, I'll throw one of these out there, you know, just because of my own curiosity. I did the offense, so I think I need to do the defense now. You know, what is some of the best all-time defenses that I've ever seen? Take care, guys.